The Ba'athist regime ruled Syria with brutality since 1963. Then, in the span of a few weeks at the end of 2024, the dictatorship was overthrown and Bashar al-Assad fled to Russia. The ouster came at the hands of the rebel leader Abu Melamed al-Jolani and his group known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham.
If you want to translate it, is some sort of like the highest authority for the liberation of Sham. Sham is the name that has been known for history to the area that is today known by the name of the Levant. That includes what is today Syria and Lebanon and Israel and Palestinian territories.
Avi Melamed is a former Israeli intelligence officer. He's now an author and heads an organization called Inside the Middle East. Since many Americans, including myself, don't know much about al-Jolani or HTS, I wanted to get Melamed's insights on the man and the group now controlling Syria. Al-Jolani has a long history of involvement with Salafi jihadist groups, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda. During the outbreak of the Syrian civil war, however, in 2014, ISIS and Al-Qaeda broke ties.
That was the time, roughly speaking, when Abu Muhammad al-Jolani basically turned towards this Al-Qaeda side and started operating in Syria as Al-Qaeda branch under the name of Jabhat al-Nusra, which means the front of the supporters or the disciples.
Al-Nusra grew into a powerful player in northwest Syria. The entire country is about the size of Washington state, and al-Nusra was carving out an area about the size of Delaware. Melamed says the group was made up of a number of different fighters and factions from different countries. That conglomeration also brought in spiritual influences from different countries. It was during this time period al-Jolani continued his journey away from the more extreme elements within Syria.
In 2016, al-Jolani made an interesting move in two aspects. First, he announced that he's detaching itself from Al-Qaeda and basically emphasized that it has been done in a mutual consent of the leadership of Al-Qaeda. And the other thing he did was to expose himself. He actually gave an interviews before, but it was anonymous.
Melamed said the announcement and split from Al-Qaeda was an interesting early indicator that Jolani was starting to focus more on the Syrian domestic identity rather than jihadism. The shift wasn't welcomed by all in al-Nusra and actually led to some pretty violent internal fighting. But in the end, Jolani and his more pragmatic approach won out.
Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that actually was formed following this inner split within, one of the significant ramifications of that was that he was able to a large extent neutralize the influence of these foreign spiritual religious leaders. And that basically enabled him to increase its I would say, political maneuvering capacities.
The split from the Jihadi influence side to more of a Syria influence, is that indicative in your mind? And you kind of just alluded to it, that the Jolani government might be more focused on national issues and less spiritual jihadi type issues?
Well, this is one of the major questions that, of course, bothers today intelligence agencies and analysts and so on. It's an open question because, on the one hand, we should remember Jolani is coming ideologically from this camp. I mean, the man has been for the last, we are now looking now almost 2 decades, very much entrenched in a world of, in the end of the day, in the world of Salafi Jihadi groups. So it's definitely, I would say, is part of its DNA. The same time
included, as going back to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, includes like beheadings, tortures, rapes, like mass killings, all the things that Americans say are awful, right?
Well, yeah, we should remind ourselves that in the end of the day, those Salafi jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda or ISIS are brutal, murderous organizations. We are all familiar with the atrocities those groups are involved in. And al-Jolani is coming from that world. Now, on the other hand, we can indicate the milestones where Jolani is actually taking a more what we could call a pragmatic approach.
Melamed points to the stark differences between ISIS's rule of its short-lived caliphate and al-Jolani's governing style. Idlib, in northwest Syria, has been under Jolani's control for several years now. There, he created the political arm of HTS, called the Syrian Salvation Government, which is markedly more welcoming to progressive ideas in Syria. For instance, under the SSG, women had many more rights and could even get a university education. A far cry from the brutality with which ISIS ruled, when petty theft could result in the perpetrator losing their hands, and beheadings were quite common.
Information that came from Idlib, which I evaluate as reliable, basically indicate that in the end of the day, it was and is an Islamic affiliated government. However, it could also be at the same time characterized as one that is not totally authoritarian in the sense that it is leaving enough space of maneuvering to decide what are the things that it's important for them to insist and to dictate, and what are the things that they don't necessarily think are important and insist to dictate.
In almost every interview since he seized power, al-Jolani talks about the future of Syria and how he wants to set up a government free from the brutality of the past and focused on the needs of Syria's people. He seems to be making headway, too, in some Western circles. The U.S. government canceled the $10 million bounty on Jolani's head, and in another sign of separation from past events, Jolani changed his name. He's dropping his wartime moniker and instead reverting back to his birth name, Ahmed al-Shara. Whether it's all enough to earn him legitimacy on the world stage, and maybe more importantly to fellow Syrians, remains to be seen. But if we believe what Shara told the BBC, a more diversified, free, and economically robust Syria may not be the stuff of fantasy anymore.
The Syrian population has lived together for thousands of years. We're going to discuss all of it. We're going to have dialogue and make sure everyone is represented. The old regime always played on sectarian divisions, but we won't.
But it will take time. Al-Shara said it could be 4 years before Syria's new constitution is written and a permanent government can be established.